Welcome to the show. I'm so glad you're here. You're going to be so glad you're here. Dr. Emilio Justo is here with me today, and he is amazing. He's had, I don't know what it is, 7.5 million views, I think, on two TEDx talks that he did. He is a doctor, a surgeon. He went to the University of Michigan. I live in Michigan. My granddaughter wants to go to that school, so I'm all about that. From Indiana, can't beat somebody from the Midwest. I love that. And he has quite a story to tell and incredible advice. He's just written a book. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about so many things. So, Doctor, welcome to the show.
Thank you so very much, Kim. It is really a delight to be with you, and I'm greatly looking forward to having a little chat together.
Great, great, great. Me too. I've still been looking forward to this. So, I would love for you to start with when you were 3 years old and you came to the US. How did that happen with your folks? Tell us
Yeah,
your story.
wonderful question. Yeah, so for your viewers, my parents and I are Cuban refugees to the United States. And just a quick backstory. So when Fidel Castro took over Cuba, one of the first mandates that he had was to have the people turn in their cash, their currency, to their local bank in favor of a new currency that Fidel had created. And of course, the new currency was, didn't have much value. My father, who always distrusted Castro, actually chose to bury his money in the backyard. And it turns out later that he was able to use that money, which still had significant value since it was the original currency. My father had befriended a Canadian diplomat, and using that money, he was able to purchase airline tickets on the black market out of Cuba through Mexico. And so we were actually in Mexico for 6 months. And then back then in the 60s, in the mid 1960s, there were many church organizations in the United States who were sponsoring Cuban refugees' entry into the United States. And the church that we came about, called Central Christian Church, which no longer exists, unfortunately, we were relocated to Gary, Indiana. And you remember Gary, Kim. Gary is back then was the home of Michael Jackson and the Jackson 5 when they were first starting.
Mhm.
My grandparents came over separately several months later, and the church that sponsored them, Tarkio Presbyterian Church, settled them into a small college town in northwest Missouri by the name of Tarkio College. And so as I was growing up in Gary, my father was working two full-time jobs, one as a steel worker and one being full-time maintenance and janitorial for the church. My mother, who had obtained her doctorate in education at the University of Havana, had to study all over again. So she had to relocate 3 hours south of Gary to Bloomington, Indiana, where Indiana University is, to start restudying all over in a different language. So they made the difficult decision at that early age to actually send me to my grandparents in Tarkio College. So from kindergarten through fourth grade, I grew up with my grandparents, and it was really a wonderful experience because we lived right in one of the dorms right on campus. It was a very, very small college. And so I was constantly surrounded by college students, which was really an amazing thing. And then finally, at the end of fourth grade, my parents had saved enough money, working their butt off, to be able to purchase a home south of Gary in a town called Crown Point. And so my grandparents and I moved from Missouri to Indiana at that time. And so I did the rest of my growing up from fifth grade through the end of high school in Crown Point, Indiana.
Wow. Wow. So, holy cow, you packed a lot in there, like 18 years of your life. And I would love for you to talk a little bit about why people leave Cuba. I think that there are so many Americans who don't understand what life is like in Cuba and how wonderful it is for people to be able to come over and be sponsored by churches however they come, but to leave that life. So if you can talk a little bit about life in Cuba and why your parents left, why people leave.
Yes, certainly. And you are correct. We in the United States, and we're so blessed to be here that sometimes we forget and we take for granted the wonderful opportunities that we have here and the freedoms that we have. But in Cuba, when Castro took over, he took over everything. He took over personal property, business property, everything. So, for example, our home, which was a meager home, he took it over and he subdivided our home, very small home, such that there were three other families living within our home. So no longer was it just our home. My father, who had a small business, he owned a small shoe store called La Peleteria California, which means the California shoe store. And one day, one evening, after he had closed shop and locked the door, he heard a banging at the front door. And through the window, he could see that there were armed guards, troops out there. And he's thinking, gosh, what should I do? But ultimately, he opened the door. And next thing you know, those troops pointed a machine gun at his face and simply said, we need your keys. And he had no other choice but to hand over his keys. And that was the end. I mean, he lost his shoe store in a heartbeat. Also, I forgot to mention that when going back to our home, when it was subdivided, one of the other things that Castro did was he had his troops take a complete inventory of everything in our home, including things as simple as cups, dishes, silverware, etc. And that was key because when we then had the opportunity to flee Cuba, as I was talking about earlier, the troops came back. This was, a few years later, they came back to do another inventory. And that inventory, that second inventory, had to match exactly in order to leave. So had we broken a plate or lost a spoon, we literally would not have been allowed to leave the country. I mean, just crazy things that we would never think of in today's society in the United States.
Right, right, right. Well, and it's not like Cuba's changed a lot, right? I mean, there's still
Yeah, I
all
mean, I mean,
different
it's
policies
still
and
communist. It's still a dictatorship. I mean, they've opened a few little things here or there to try and get money because they're a very poor country. But essentially, people don't have freedom. And I was there. I mean, it's been a little while now. Last time I was there, I went back about 20 years ago, but it really hasn't changed that much. And I do intermittently, it's interesting being in Arizona, which is not exactly what I would consider the Mecca of Cuban refugees, but I do intermittently see Cuban refugees that come to my ophthalmology practice as a patient, and I ask them questions, and they all want to flee and did flee because really things are very tightly controlled. There's this paranoia that they can't speak freely. When I visited Cuba, and I befriended many people since I'm fluent in Spanish, and they love Americans, by the way. But they really do not want to speak negatively about Castro or communism. And so it was very difficult. I'd really have to be in a very, very private place or maybe in their home to get something out of them, because out in the public arena, there is no way they will say anything negative because they are fearful that someone will hear them and report them, turn them in, and then they'll be thrown in jail. So when you're living in that sort of society, there's incredible paranoia, even though they're very, very happy, friendly people. The Cuban people are just, it's just amazing how they adapt to this society and make the best of it because they are very happy and friendly people, and they love Americans, contrary to, the Castro's propaganda where America is this big monster. No, the people know better. They really love Americans and they look up to them.
wow, that's cool. Thank you for sharing all that. It's such a hot topic, letting people in, not letting people in. Just a real quick, what I believe is that we're just supposed to love everybody. Way back in Leviticus, it says love everybody. It's sort of like our only job. When they asked Jesus, what's the top thing, there's whatever 672 or whatever the number is of laws in the Old Testament. How do we know when we're sinning, kind of thing? And he said, all you got to do is love God and love yourself and love each other. Like, just love everybody. And so I keep love in mind when I think about what we should do with immigration. Just a little sidebar. Anyway, so you ended up at the University of Michigan, and great school, and you went and got your doctorate, or right, and your MD, I guess it would be.
Right.
And what was that experience like for you?
Yeah, so let me give you a little backstory on that. So, uh, through high school, I'll actually take you a step back if you don't mind, since we're talking about my life's journey. So in high school, I was in Indiana, and I went to a parochial, Catholic high school in Merrillville, Indiana. It was about 20 minutes away from Crown Point. And in my freshman year of high school, uh, I developed really, really, really severe acne. Now, when we think of acne, we think of a teenage kid that, has acne and doesn't look good. I don't know, but this was literally one of the most severe cases of acne conglobata in the medical literature. And I would sit there as a freshman in class. I remember it to this day. I mean, literally, I would have pus running down my face. It was so bad. And then subsequently, I developed this fever, this persistent fever that would not go away for over 30 days. And I had been under the care for my acne of a dermatologist for a couple years, and I was on medication, but nothing was controlling it. Finally, our doctor decided to transfer me, and I was admitted to Children's Memorial Hospital at Northwestern University in downtown Chicago. And they did all sorts of testing, and the doctors thought for sure that this persistent fever had something to do with some insidious cancer inside of me. And they were doing scans, bone marrow biopsies, I mean, just the works. And finally, after a few weeks, it was determined that the root cause of my so-called fever of unknown origin, which is the terminology, was the severe acne and the pus pockets in my face. So it then required 3 surgeries while I was hospitalized to basically debride my face and then have skin grafts. And all the while in the hospital lying in bed, my parents took turns because Northwestern was about an hour away from home. They would drive and pick up my homework and bring it to me, and I would do my best to get homework done. Of course, back then we didn't have computers, we didn't have Zoom, there was no online training. It was just basically do it on your own. And so it really taught me, in my view, really how to be resilient and to persevere. And I use this kind of negative part of my life as a jumping off point. And I really, after that, once I was discharged home after 2.5 months free of fever and my face scarred forever, I really took off and became I was always active in sports. I continued my sports activities, school clubs, in the social scene. I didn't let it inhibit me, even though, clearly it was very obvious that my face was scarred. And ultimately, I'm proud to say, and I don't say this in a boasting manner, but simply to point to your viewers that we all have challenges and we can try to overcome them. I know some challenges are much more difficult than what I experienced, but ultimately I became valedictorian of our high school class. And that experience is what led for me to be accepted as one of 10 nationwide applicants into the University of Michigan's accelerated pre-medical medical program, which was a 6-year intensive program. Normally, the path to medical school is that you go to college for 4 years, you get your undergraduate degree, then you apply to medical school, and then do another 4 years. In this program, it was all bundled together as a 6-year intensive. And so I decided to take up Michigan's offer because I had already been accepted to a small all-male private college in Southern Indiana called Wabash College, which is fairly well known in the Midwest because it sends a lot of their students to the Ivy Leagues. And I had gotten an Eli Lilly scholarship for a full 4-year ride there. But given the opportunity I had at the University of Michigan, I finally decided, even though my parents laid it on the line, they said, look, it's completely up to you. You can go to Wabash, and because, they didn't have much money, we'll save up and we'll get you a car. Or you can go to Michigan and, we'll pay what we can, but then you're going to have to do student loans and you're not going to have the car. So part of my delayed gratification journey is as I'm sure you've heard that topic in my book, is that I delayed gratification and said, no, I'll pass on the car, but I really want to go to University of Michigan. I'll be done 2 years sooner. So I graduated at the age of 23 as a medical doctor, which is really almost unheard of. And then after 4 years of residency in ophthalmology, I actually started my private practice at the age of 27. I moved to Arizona, sunny, palm tree ridden Arizona, because I wanted a change from the Midwest. So that's kind of the journey where I've gotten to. But when I first showed up at University of Michigan, I led such a sheltered life in a small town in Indiana. The story I tell people, and this is the honest truth, is that, being a valedictorian at Andrean High School in Merrillville, Indiana, I thought was a big deal. And it was a big deal. But nonetheless, I was so sheltered when I stepped foot at Michigan, surrounded by 40,000 people, students. And I started to get to know my other classmates that had been accepted into this program. And many of them, not all, but many of them were just absolutely brilliant, academically. And I was just in awe. I mean, I thought, oh my gosh, here I thought I was some hotshot being valedictorian. I mean, I'm nothing. I mean, there are just some incredibly bright students. So that was my first take of University of Michigan. And then my second was, I was thrown into a roommate situation in a dorm, rooming blind because I didn't know anyone there. And my college roommate was a junior. I was a freshman. I was 17 years old when I started college. He was 19. He had just gotten back from backpacking throughout Europe. And he really kind of taught me the ropes. To this day, he's one of my best friends. And, and he's a Jewish guy. And, going to a Catholic high school and being so sheltered, honestly, I grew up not even knowing what Jews were. So he's the one that taught me how to eat lox and bagels and the Jewish faith. I mean, he's taught me so much. I really credit him, and so it was a great experience. Great experience.
Yeah, that's so cool. So here you go from Cuban refugee coming over, probably not knowing English at all, and then getting into learning English, getting into school, all of that stuff, going all the way through, and the troubles that you had with acne, and with being in the hospital and missing that time and still graduating valedictorian, and then being one of 10 to go to U of M, like in this special program. That is also amazing. That is also outstanding. And you smile about it. And when you tell the story, you tell it as a story of resilience and a story of determination and stick-to-itness. And you could have taken a whole different route. You could have said, "Guy, forget this. I'm whatever. I just am done with, I don't want to study anymore. I don't want high school anymore, whatever." But you didn't. And I think that is a good thing to take away from this is we get to choose our own narrative, right? We get to write our own story in so many ways. Things might happen outside of us, but how we deal with those things is up to us. And so there's some crappy stuff that can happen, but if you can take it and turn it into something good, and it sounds like for you, Emilio, tell me if this is true, but it sounds like for you, it was a pivotal moment. Like it was a moment where you you could have chosen to go either way. And you're like, no, I am Emilio. I am strong. I'm going to do this. I'm going to graduate top of my class.
Well, yes and no. Let me be brutally honest about this. As I look back over that time period, to others, it may seem, you're describing it in such a unique proposition, and I guess in one way it is, and I appreciate your kind words, I sincerely do. But to me, Kim, really, it's just my life, and I didn't program it. I didn't have the capacity as a teenager to say, oh, well, I'm going to be resilient, and I'm going to persevere, and I'm going to show them. No, it wasn't quite like that. It was just living my life. And one of my mantras, I have what I refer to as my Cuban triad. I have a talk I just recently gave a talk at Cambridge University in the UK, and it's on mastering the American dream, the Cuban triad for triumphant success. And that triad consists of number one, self-discipline, number two, resilience and perseverance, and number three, delayed gratification. And that self-discipline is just something that I guess is just innate in me because my parents never had to push me along, never. They were always very supportive, and their support came in the way of love and nurturing. And because we were refugees and immigrants, they decided consciously to not have additional children because they didn't have much money. They wanted to provide as much as they could for me. So I was raised an only child. But I was self-motivated, and that self-discipline, that self-motivation is what led for me to push forward and have that resilience. Like one thing led to the other. The self-discipline led to the resilience, which led to the perseverance. And ultimately, my life throughout the majority of my life until maybe the last 10 years has been one of delayed gratification, not by choice, but simply because it was my life. So as I look back at it, I mean, it's somewhat unique. It certainly may not. I don't know your background, so I don't know what your story is like. But there are stories that are far more, unique and outstanding than mine, right? But this is just my story, and I am proud of it, and so I talk about it now. Now, as I've gotten older, Kim, and I look at the mortality of life, right? I mean, I'm hoping I'm going to be on this earth another 20, 30, plus years, God willing, but we don't know, right? We don't know. We're not infallible. And when we're young, we think, oh, we can do anything and nothing's going to stop us. But now, I have three teenage children. My wife and I share three teenage children. And I start looking, at life and thinking back. And so I wanted to kind of put my life into words, whether it be in print on a book, whether it be in speeches and in talks. Number one, it started because of just trying to leave a legacy to my kids, because even though I talk about these things to them, I don't think they really fully internalize it. I mean, they say that they do and they understand, but just in their actions, yeah, they're teenagers.
Yeah.
I don't think they truly get it. And so if I happen to be gone someday and maybe they're older, maybe they have their own family, maybe they'll pause for a moment and look back and read about my life. I even chose, for example, on the book, I made the conscious decision to narrate my own audiobook that's on Audible. And I did that. I mean, number one, I enjoyed the process immensely. I would tell anyone who has a book, do an audiobook and narrate it yourself. It was just such an incredible process. But number two, it's now in my voice, in my words, forever. It will exist forever. And my kids can listen to my voice when I'm gone. If someday there are grandkids, they can listen to my voice. I mean, the world at large, I mean, you can listen to my voice if you haven't heard enough of it this morning. So that's kind of the journey that I've had.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. So cool. So cool. And, we live in this land where you said it earlier, we have all these freedoms. We've got things at our fingertips. We got restaurants on every corner, drive-throughs on at every restaurant practically. And it's not about delayed gratification. It's about instant gratification in so many ways. And people are in debt over instant gratification. People that are in debt can be more stressed because of instant gratification, right? Like there's a pile of things that when you don't practice delayed gratification, when you don't really think about the choices that you're making, when you're spending money and whatever, that are harmful to you. And the opposite of that, delayed gratification, is so good for you, right? And good to you.
Yes, I mean it's a tricky balancing act. And when I preach delayed gratification, keep in mind, I'm preaching in general terms, right? We have to be realistic. It doesn't imply that there can't be small pieces of instant gratification along the way. I mean, there should be actually, because we want to be able to have some celebrations along the way. I'm all in favor of that. But you are correct. The delayed gratification, uh, I think is absolutely key to the success of any individual. If you're expecting it all now, as quite often teenagers do, based upon social media, that they think they can be rich and famous and have everything today. Generally speaking, it's very rare to encounter that. You have to work hard and persevere. And really achieve over time. And that does require that delayed gratification. And quite often, that immediate pleasure that one is deferring on, when you wait for a later and even greater reward, the taste will be so much sweeter. Because once you work for something, like for example, I use the analogy because it's important to us here in our home, of our oldest, wanting a car, for example. And it's one thing to give a car, and then that child may, appreciate it and may take care of it. It's not that they wouldn't. But when they actually work and use their own blood, sweat, and tears to save up, and then buy their own car, boy, that has so much more power. And the individual can be proud of his or her accomplishments, and take even better care of it. I mean, when you've put your own body, mind, heart, and soul into things, it's just so much exponentially better. But it takes time. It takes time. I mean, we haven't gotten to where we are in our lives, whether it's you, Kim, in your life, or myself, without a lot of hard work. And along the way, for any of us, I'm sure the same is true for you. We've all had our challenges. We've all encountered failures, and that's okay. That's how we learn. We have to be able to embrace our failures, not shy away from them. Failures is part of our life's journey. So if we try and just shy away from it, I don't think that's necessarily good. I mean, certainly we don't want to purposely commit an act that is going to cause failure, but along the way, we're going to have failures. We're going to have what some refer to as setbacks, and I like to refer to them as temporary steps back. And then by having that temporary step back, we then have to not only bounce back, but more importantly, bounce forward in terms of achieving greater success and learning. One has to always learn. There's always something to be taught about a failure. And that's one of the things I try and teach our kids, but, as teenagers, they don't like to be taught by their parents. So it kind of
That's
goes
true.
in one ear and out the other sometimes.
Yeah, I can tell you as a mother of five that I understand. My kids are all grown, but yes, I remember those teenage years. I loved the teenage years, but yeah, I don't, I don't think they started asking for advice or listening to my unsolicited advice until they were in their 30s. So you've got a ways to go
Oh
before
my
you're
gosh.
going to listen
You're
to.
killing
Yeah,
me. You're killing me,
yeah,
girl.
yeah. You're welcome. You're welcome for that. I love it that you have this legacy for your kids, that you recorded the book yourself, and that you have that. That is such a cool idea. Like, I think people absolutely, or just record yourself. I would love to see like my grandparents talking, or whoever, great aunts and uncles that I've lost, or whoever. Would be wonderful to have tape of them. So it's a wonderful idea. But the reality is, beyond hearing your voice, beyond everything else, your message is so rich, and your book is so full of wisdom and practical things that you can do. Like, if you've not been practicing delayed gratification, there are steps, right, that can get you there. And why don't you talk about that?
Certainly. And yeah, there's many steps one can take. I think first and foremost, one has to create and write down specific long-term goals. And I must admit that throughout my life, I always haven't been one to write them down. I do think that when you put pen to paper and you look at it on a consistent basis, ideally every day, that it can be helpful because it rewires your brain, and then the goals become more achievable in your mind. The other part is that when one sets out the specific goals, I think that one potential mistake that many of us make, including myself, is that we don't make the goal big enough. I think that one really has to have lofty goals. I mean, goals that ultimately can be achievable, but sometimes we shortchange ourselves by setting very small goals. Now, along the way, when you have this lofty goal, there are going to be little milestones along the way. And it's important to keep that momentum and keep that positive energy going. It's important to celebrate those milestones. So I
Mhm.
think that that's one of the key steps to starting the process. We have to cultivate within ourselves a certain sense of patience and resilience, which we've talked about. I think that that's a critical step. And so, the earlier I think one can start in their life, the better. Even something that I think you alluded to somewhat earlier is in the book, I even have a little chapter on prudent saving and investing. It's one of the things I try and instill upon our kids. Now, only our oldest so far is working part-time when he's not in college. But for example, a simple thing, which many of your viewers may already know or may already practice, but I can tell you a lot of people don't, is I said to him when he first started a job, just working bussing tables at a restaurant, is I said, look, you got to set up an automatic system, which is very easy to do. Every employer pretty much can do it, whereby when you have a paycheck coming, that a bare minimum of 10%, I mean, ideally 15% or even maybe 20% if you're aggressive, but at bare minimum, 10% of that paycheck has to be automatically debited right off the top, right off your gross amount, and needs to go into a separate savings vehicle, whatever that may be. If it's a savings account or any other type of account, you could even, if you really have a long-term vision, you could even start an IRA or a Roth IRA retirement account. But regardless, take that 10% because you'll never see it. You won't think of it. And it's really, certainly 10% is not that much. And so our son, to his credit, has been doing that, and he doesn't see that 10%, so it doesn't really faze him. But if you think, oh no, I have the proper motivation, I'm going to get my paycheck, and then I'm going to transfer money over into a savings account. Oh, that may work once or twice, but then you're going to stop doing it because you don't want to take that money out, right? You want to use that money. And
Not
so
only that, but you have to actually do it. You have to physically go online and transfer, or go on your phone, or go to the bank, or whatever. And it's so much easier if you just let your employer do it for you. And I agree.
absolutely.
Yeah. And if you don't have the money in your account, like you're not seeing the money, you're
You
not going
don't
to
think
notice
about it.
that.
Yeah, yeah.
And
And
I think about starting at 18 years old. I mean, if I would have started saving 10% of my paycheck at 18 years old, I'd be in Hawaii right now. We wouldn't even be talking. So maybe it's good that I didn't, because I get to talk to you. But that's big. That's huge. I think it's such a great idea.
Yeah, I mean, if you do the math, because again, I try to explain to them, and trust me, I'm no financial guru. I'm not here pretending to be an investment advisor or some great mathematician. But if you take a reasonably small amount, let's say that a young person, little by little, saves $10,000, and if they have that $10,000 and they invest it into the market, nothing aggressive, but just like an index fund that follows the S&P 500. And you look back historically that the market has averaged about 10% a year over the last 50 years historically. So in the long term, you do that, let's say when you're 20 or 25, and then you fast forward about 40 years later, that $10,000, when you do the math, I mean, I may be off slightly, but when you do the math, $10,000 ends up being somewhere around $1.6 million. So you can
Yeah.
extrapolate from that if it's a larger amount, um, it's going to be a larger return, right? So if you do $100,000, which of course not too many 20 or 25-year-olds have $100,000, but hypothetically, if you do, 40 years later, that's going to be roughly $16 million. That's a heck of a lot of money, right? So,
Mhm.
and it's not that you have to have all that money up front. You just put a little bit aside, keep putting it away, and it builds. The power of compound interest is something that I didn't learn until later in life, because again, my parents didn't have much from a financial standpoint. So I didn't learn these basics. I just learned it by the school of hard knocks. And
Mhm.
and so I'm trying to kind of instill this in our kids to get them to think about these things.
Yeah, that's so good. That's so good. That's such great advice. So good. Yeah, delayed gratification, man. I think we don't talk about it enough or think about it enough, and but it makes so much sense. And you were talking about writing down your goals on a piece of paper. Yeah, the act of actually writing, what that does to your brain, and then to read it every day. I think one of the things that does is it makes you believe it more that it can happen, right? Like that's what I find. If I have it
Right.
written down and a lofty goal, and I read it every day, I go, oh yeah, well that's going to happen. That'll happen. That'll happen. And so you start working toward it, and so then you need a plan to work toward it.
Yeah.
And
And
yeah,
those goals, I mean, yes, you can have the long-term goals, right? You can have your 20-year goal, your 10-year goal, your 1-year goal. But I would even suggest writing out your daily goals, right? Your daily activity list. And I think that that's important because, as so commonly is the case, and I've fallen into this trap where I'll write down a list of 10 things that I want to accomplish today. And what does our mind automatically do? We go to doing the simple, least important things first. But really, what we should be doing, in my opinion, is first prioritizing the order of those daily activities, those daily goals. So prioritize them, and then concentrating on the most important ones to knock out first, which may or may not take more time. They don't always take more time, but they may perhaps take more focus and energy. But by doing that and making that a priority and kind of creating what I think some call time boxing, is making the time for those important goals. And then as you knock those out, then you're just left with the ones that really weren't that important to begin with, which you may or may not get to. And if you don't get to them, okay, that's fine. Then they roll over to the next day. But it's important to really go after the important things first and not just kind of be somewhat lazy and do the simple stuff, because that's not really going to ultimately get you to achieve the bigger goal, which is what you're aiming for.
yeah, well, great advice. That's great advice. I love that. Yeah, I'm picturing like your son, your oldest, uh, having a piece of paper that he carries around in his wallet, that his projected 10% when he's going to retire at 55 or whatever, retire young because he's going to have the money. And how exciting that would be. That's like writing down a long-term goal, right? And so then you have the steps toward the long-term goal, putting in the 10% all the time and whatever, but also the short-term goals you talked about that we need to, if we write them down and make sure that we get them done. I mean, that's a big thing, right? Is the follow through and do it, and not just do it, but I love the verse, do everything as unto the Lord, right? So do everything with excellence, and like your book is excellent. So talk about the process of writing, or maybe what you think is the best advice in the book.
Wow, the best advice. I think just to going back to the concept of delayed gratification, I think that I don't know if this is the best advice, because I mean there's so many things that come to mind, but I think of in today's society, especially for the youth, not just teenagers, but even young adults, that we potentially, most of us spend so much time on so-called social media or other types of activities that really do not foster anything of importance in our life. I mean, it's just really, for the most part, a waste of time. Now, are there nice things and important things that you can see on social media? Sure. But for the most part, I'm a believer in dedicating oneself to activities that really are going to enrich our lives. A simple one, which I could kick myself, which I just developed a habit just in the last few years, is audiobooks, right? I have, going to work every day, I have a 1 hour commute one way. So that's 2 hours a day that I used to devote to basically listening to music and the radio, which I love music. But what an incredible waste. And it wasn't until in the recent past that I discovered audiobooks. And boy, that's been so enriching. I can use that time to listen to wonderful books. But so whatever it is that one is doing, I think that prioritizing doing activities that are going to enrich ourselves. And then when you do those activities, then you can reward yourself by maybe spending a very set amount of time on social media or Instagram or Facebook or whatever your choosing is. But it is very addictive, and I think it's important to break that addiction, and you have to do it consciously. And I mean, I know how addictive. I used to not do any social media at all throughout my whole life, up until the last year when I started getting involved in public speaking and the TEDx arena and the book, etc. I started getting involved in social media, mainly trying to do some posts here or there. But every once in a blue moon, I'll catch myself looking at other people's posts, particularly on Instagram, and I must admit that they're captivating. I could see how people could spend literally hours, because sometimes I catch myself, it's been 30 minutes and I've been going through post after post after post, and it's just I'm just sucked into it. But then I catch myself thinking, what the heck am I doing? I mean, I am just wasting away time, that I could be doing important things that will ultimately help my life, rather than just sitting here passively, doing this. So I kind of kick myself. And I think for your viewers and your audience and maybe the children of viewers, I think that's an important concept in life and in the book, is to try to break free from these addictions. And it's not just social media. I mean, this applies across the board to many addictions that many of us have, that we have to make a conscious effort to really devote ourselves to the important things, because ultimately that's what's going to get us to that goal, whether it's your monthly goal, your yearly goal, or your goal in 10 years from now.
Right. Yeah, it definitely is an addiction. I mean, they talk about that, right? That it's an addiction. I don't know if it's an addiction to the screen or if it's an addiction to instant gratification, because that's what you get too. And we used to watch I watched the Brady Bunch and Partridge Family growing up, right? And loved those shows. And so a half-hour show, you'd sit down, you'd sit through the commercials, and you'd watch a show. And now it's like 40-second clips, 3-minute clips, on to the next, on to the next. And you can just go down this rabbit hole and look at the clock, and 3 hours later, you're like, where did the time just go? So I think along with your incredible advice is to maybe tell Alexa to give you a certain time, for an alarm or whatever, or set your alarm, your Apple Watch, or whatever it is you have, so that you don't go longer than you really are wanting to go.
Yeah,
'Cause it can
absolutely.
fly. Yeah.
But I would also make sure that you first spend your time doing the necessary things, and then use that, let's say that 30 minutes, I'm just making that number up, but let's say use that 30 minutes for social media kind of as your little reward, as your little instant gratification reward. But first, you need to really handle business, so to speak, and you need to do the important things. And that can be a challenge. That can be a challenge particularly for the youth of today. So it's a hard concept sometimes for them to grasp, or they may grasp it, but it's an even harder concept for them to execute.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. One thing that I've heard you say, Emilio, is that obsession is a superpower. Can you explain that to me? Explain
Yeah,
that
yeah.
to
Well, actually, to quote myself accurately, delayed gratification is the superpower, but progression in life, in my view, progression requires obsession. And what do I mean by that? It is in my second TEDx talk, which is called Unleashing the Drive Within, the Obsession Advantage to Unprecedented Success, which I delivered at Western University in Canada. Basically, I changed the connotation of obsession from the traditional negative connotation that we normally associate, which is an unhealthy fixation, to what I consider to be a very positive obsession that's necessary in our lives, whereby we're actually obsessed by being passionate about a particular goal. And I think to achieve anything in life, and in my life, I've been fortunate enough to achieve many things. I've also had significant failures in my life. So I would be lying to anyone to tell them that my life has been just this roses all the way across. No, I mean, I've failed miserably at times, but to be able to achieve, I think one has to be obsessed in a positive way, and to be passionate. I mean, you got to have passion. And I'm all about passion. And sometimes my kids look at me and they think I'm crazy or psycho, but passion is part of life. And you got to be passionate about your goals. You got to want them. It's got to be burning inside of you that you want to achieve it. And so that's the positive connotation of obsession, not the negative psychiatric connotation of being OCD. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the positive obsession.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And, I think for some people, you have to really think about your goals. Some people might never have thought about what is their long-term goal, or what are short-term goals? What goals do you really have? And I think first you got to kind of discover yourself, and leave all the words that have been said to you from teachers telling you can't, or parents or grandparents or whoever in your life that tells you you can't, or don't set goals, or you'll never achieve, or whatever, all the stuff that we all hear along the way. Get all that stuff out of your mind, and then really think about what is a great long-term goal for you and your family, and then that you can get behind, that you can be passionate about, that you can be obsessed over, so that you'll achieve it. And so anyway, yeah, I
Yeah,
love your definition of obsession. I love it. It's
yeah,
so good.
And I agree with you. I think it can be a little overwhelming if you were to ask someone, okay, what's your long-term goal 20, 30 years from now? And that can be an overwhelming question to ask. So I think maybe it may be more prudent to start with shorter term goals as one is thinking about it and writing it out. Say, okay, what is it that a year from now that I can look back on and say, wow, I've really achieved something special. And then from there, you work forward further and say, okay, well, what is it 5 years from now that would really make me proud and think to myself, my gosh, I'm so proud of myself that I really achieved this. And then just keep expanding the timeline. But if you just start out by thinking to yourself, gosh, what's my 20, 30, 40-year goal? It seems so nebulous. It's just out there that it's hard to capture that. So I think maybe starting with a little bit more short term and then working your way outwards, I think may be better for most individuals out there. And it reminds me, I don't know if you've seen the clip, Jim Carrey, the comedian.
Mhm.
There's a clip where he talks about the fact that he is one who visualizes, and so he wrote out way back in his younger days when he was kind of starting out. He wrote out a check to himself for $20 million, and that this was going to be the check that he would be paid. And he had that check, he hung on to it, he would look at it every day. And apparently, according to his story, I think it was within less than a year of doing that, and that visualization process is that when he got a particular movie contract, I don't remember which movie, but he got his first movie contract that paid him $20 million. Now, that's not to say that we're all going to achieve that level of success in such a short amount of time, but it does, go to the power of goal setting and even visualizing. I think I certainly don't do, I'll be honest, I don't do enough visualizing myself, but I certainly am a believer in the power of our brain. When we visualize something, again, we turn on those neural connections that will make it much more achievable if we keep visualizing it, if we keep repeating it to ourselves, if we keep reminding ourselves each day and looking at it on pen and paper. We're much, much, much more likely to achieve that specific goal.
Yeah, it's amazing how the brain works and how if you do that, do exactly what you're saying, that you tend to do the things to get you there. And without even necessarily thinking about it, you work toward that goal because you've got it in your head every day. This has been so good. We are nearly out of time. I am so appreciative of you. Where can people buy The Power of Pause?
Well, the book is available pretty much most anywhere. I mean, it's obviously on Amazon, and the audiobook is on Audible, but it's also available in all the major retail outlets such as Barnes and Noble, Walmart, Target, et cetera. So it's The Power of Pause, Mastering Delayed Gratification for Success. There's also a link on my personal website. So I have a website I created, which is separate from my medical practice website. And that website is dremiliojusto.com, and that's DREMILIOJUSTO.com. And through there, you can link to the book to buy the book. There's a contact page where you can email me directly, and I answer all my emails personally, and usually pretty prompt, usually if not the same day, certainly within 24 hours. And there's all sorts of articles and podcast links to all of that. So it's a fun website. I would definitely check it out.
Yeah, I agree. I second that entirely because yes, it is a really great website with lots of good stuff in it, and definitely check it out. So thank you for being here. Thank you for everything that you shared. I appreciate all of it. And I'm so sorry that our time is up. Like I feel like I could talk to you forever.
Thank you,
But
Kim, and I appreciate your graciousness, and thank you for allowing me to be part of your show. I really do appreciate it.
oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. So thank you for joining us. And until next time, be blessed.